Formable nations in EU4 are great, offering everything from mid to late game goals to spikes in power to frankly just content for you to enjoy. But while formables like Prussia and the Mughals are well known for their strength, well, there are plenty of formable nations that are insanely obscure within the game. We're not talking about revolta tags or anything that convoluted. We are looking at specifically formable nations that someone went out of their way to make a formable through coding a formation of said nation decision. However, despite that, no one seems to ever talk about these nations. I will warn you though, basically all of the nations we talk about today are obscure for good reason, hence I cannot actually recommend any of these campaigns as playthroughs, as within every region there are just better options for you to partake in and form. But they exist nonetheless, and today I will show you 5, which, as always, are intended to be sorted in increasing levels of obscurity. But before we get into that, just a quick pit stop to say that, as always, a like would be appreciated and a subscription would be insane. 50k subscribers has been achieved, in fact, so achieved that we're actually sitting above 51,000. So let's go for 52 while we're at it. Anyway, enough self-shilling, let's get to the video proper with the first nation of our list, for which I have actually set up the nation to get ready to form it. Now this nation is a bit obscure in the weirdness sense that you can only form this if you have had a previous event, or are playing a nation that doesn't actually exist in 1444. So, if you want to get there as fast as possible, you have to go ahead and play as one of the nations in this area that has the culture of Hausa to unite the Hausa people. Now, as you formed Hausa, you're going to have access to creating the Sokoto Caliphate. This is going to have some strict requirements. Not only do you need to be Sunni and have a whole bunch of setups, like having 8 cities, you also need to make sure that you have a culture group that doesn't exist day 1, or have obtained the Empire Government rank. On top of that, you need to either have at least 50 piety, get a level 3 Inquisitor while not running a deficit, or have enabled religious ideas. To be clear, you don't need to complete any of religious ideas, you need to enable them, so it's as simple as going to get a free slot at admin 5, selecting religious ideas, and then after you've done that, you would enable the condition, meaning that you can just cancel them for free. This allows us to create the Sokoto Caliphate. Now, Sokoto Caliphate has a nice red map color, this is a pretty nice one, and not one I'm going to complain about. However, the relatively defining feature of it is that you have a pure green flag. And that's quite unique. There are not many nations out there that have just a green flag. Like, that's it. They are just green. If you want to have green as your flag and just partake in green gaming, then this will be the nation for you. Otherwise, you do pick up the feudal theocracy government reform, which is quite a good government reform, and that's about it. This is where the good news ends. Your ideas are nothing to call home about, including cavalry costs on a non-cavalry nation. Great. Recovery army morale speed, which is probably the most useful thing here. A biggest 10% recover army morale speed is on top of your base 15%, so that's quite nice. Otherwise, you get some missionaries and missionary strength, so you're relatively reasonably good at converting, especially when you're combining with feudal theocracy. But beyond that, fort defense, I guess that's okay. 10 morale, that's better in the area. Possibly transfer true faith, okay, that's neat. A max promoted culture, just the one, nothing to call home about. And a yearly prestige, as well as army tradition and battles. Yeah, this is kind of a mediocre at best converter nation in the area that just doesn't really see play, and frankly for good reason. But we're only on the 5th most obscure nation, we're going to get much worse than that. For the next nation on our list, you have to go ahead and play as a nation within the Marathi culture group, as this will let you go ahead and form, absolutely no surprises for Maratha. I've yet again also selected another nation that has a relatively unique flag, that's its core flag, for you for this demonstration, but one of the main problems I find with the Formable is that you need Admin Tech 18, and if you're playing in India, they're just better nations that you can form that don't even require Admin Tech 18 and actually have nice bonuses. So for example, forming Bharat is just an option, and by Admin Tech 18 you can probably get all the core provinces you need. However, this does still let you form the Maratha Confederation. It does have a nice side effect, as this does also change your technology group to Indian, so if you're something like West African, this can be a good way of getting out of that West African tech group. Beyond that though, it is not really useful. This is another example of a nation though with a flat color scheme, so you have a nice just flat orange color, and I quite like this blue. This is a relatively nice blue map color. Unfortunately, this is kind of where the praise ends, as not only does this again require Admin Tech 18, it does not exactly come with incredibly amazing ideas, or even missions. So yes, this is a Tech 18 formable that doesn't even have missions. For your troubles, you get 10% national manpower, woo, and 15% manpower recovery, and you finish off with a beautiful 10% stab cost reduction. Yeah, not the best. At least you have 15 cavalry combat abilities, so you can kind of pretend to be a cavalry nation while not being a cavalry nation. Another 20 fort defense, which actually is pretty decent by this point, but still not the most useful, especially by Tech 18. minus 20 infantry cost, which, okay, now that's a good reduction, and probably the peak best thing of it, but considering the description is we're using peasant soldiers, there's not much quality here, and that's one thing you're going to find. Outside of your cavalry buffs, not a lot of army quality either. You pick up 15 CCR, which isn't actually bad, don't get me wrong, but there are just better options in the area, like ones with admin efficiency. You pick up 15 reform progress growth, that'll be really helpful at admin tech 18. You pick up 10 goods produced, which again is quite a nice bonus, but basically the best bonus you're going to get out of this tech tree, and a massive 10% ship cost. Yeah. Again, this nation is an obscure formable for a reason. This is just not worth waiting for Tech 18 for, especially considering you get exactly 0 missions for your troubles. And yeah, only do it for the randomly. I think this is quite a nice blue map color, as well as yet again orange only flag, which is neat. But that concludes our second obscure formable as we move on to our next one, which is right next door. But I will immediately point out that the previous formable does also require this province that this formable also requires, making it a shared requirement, which I never thought this random jungle within India will be a shared requirement for any formables, but there we go. Regardless, if you are going to be playing as anyone within the Central Indian culture group, so Gondi works, but basically you need to be anyone within Central India, this is the formable for you. Naturally, as you may guess, this isn't exactly a popular area to play in. You are just surrounded by more fun tags to play, like Orissa, Bengal, Vijayanagar, and, well, Bahmanis before I annex them for the demonstration. Jaunpur, Delhi, and Sirhind also offer interesting gameplay choices, as does, well, even nations like Mewar or Sindh. So, again, you basically just have much better options to play in India than nations within the Central Indian tech group. But for your trouble, you'll be able to go ahead and form the Kingdom of Nagpur. This moves your capital and gives you a very crudely drawn flag. This genuinely looks like something I made in MS Paint, I'll be honest, and I promise you I did not. This is vanilla, and I don't think I've practically ever seen it before outside of this video, because no one forms this, why would you? But you do pick up a rather nice Netherlands orange. It's a more bright and I'd like to say happy orange than the Orissa orange, so one I would recommend for that. What else do you get in terms of your ideas? Well, you don't get missions, just to clarify that again, and also this is a Tech 10 formable, so it's not that difficult to form, you don't have to conquer that much for it, but you still have to wait for Admin Tech 10 to form it to get no missions. But I think the idea set is a bit more interesting, at least has some unique bonuses. 15% opening morale and 15% aggressive expansion isn't awful, although bear in mind again, this is aggressive expansion you have to wait until Admin Tech 10 for. You pick up -2 unrest, which is at least a reasonable reduction, so nothing to scoff at, but isn't the best. You pick up a land leader maneuver pip, one of the worst pips, but it's still there. 10 construction cost is nice, but nothing to call home about. 0.5 yearly army tradition. Come on, couldn't you give us one? You get 10 shock damage. By Tech 10, shock is starting to fall off, but it's not fallen off yet, so it's not the worst. 10 production efficiency, again, a small economic buff I'm not going to complain about. And finally, stab hit to declare war and unjustified demands. I actually think this is an interesting combination. You very rarely see stab hit to declare wars within idea groups, and I think this is one of the few occurrences that you will, well, see it in. For example, diplomatic ideas, which lower impact on stability from diplomatic actions, as well as combining this with, well, I'm tribal here, but there will be a reform that you can normally access for giving you, I believe, Machiavellian rule, and this -1 stab hit to declare war can be quite useful as it allows you to mitigate some extra stab hits from truce breaking. I wouldn't recommend actually playing this nation for some kind of world conquest setups, because outside of your rather dorky flag and neat map color, you don't get many bonuses to that, but the stab hit to declare war is at least something unique that I have to commend, as is their finisher. Overextension impact modifier isn't the most common modifier out there, but it exists, and it's certainly a nice one to have too, so it's at least more of an interesting nation, but one you just don't see play, because again, what is this flag? It looks like a child drew it. My apologies if you happen to be from Nagpuri, but yeah, please get a fancier flag. With the Nagpur art department significantly slandered though, we move on to the nation of Shan. Here I've, again, just snaked the provinces you need to form it. The nice thing with this formable is at least you don't have any technological requirements, you just need to be not a horde and own a bunch of cores, as well as being within a specific culture group. In this case, you need to be, well, Shan. I know, right? What a surprise. Once you have united the Shan culture group, for the most part you don't actually have to unite it, you're allowed to skip out on some provinces, you can go ahead and confederate the Shan states. This will actually give you 20 prestige, which isn't that common for formables to have prestige, which is nice. You gain a very papal, pure white color, which is neat, and the flag isn't awful. I think that's a neat looking flag, so there I have to commend you. However, you yet again don't really gain missions for your trouble, but at least this mission for Unite the Shan is rather interesting, as it lets you automatically inherit any of your subjects within the same culture group, so that's neat. And hey, a permaclaim on the Burma region, can't complain I guess. Talking about ideas now, you pick up 50% air cost, great, and plus some max promoted cultures, and you finish with 15% manpower recovery speed, so Nothing to call home about. It's pretty random bonuses that aren't great. You have, as always, some fort defense. It's kind of obligatory for a lot of these formables that aren't great. 10% production efficiency. It's an economic bonus, nothing too amazing. -1 unrest, can't even do -2 here. Again, nothing to call home about. 10 domestic trade power. Whoa, Paradox, slow down, me. That's a really strong modifier. You know, inside a trade node like here, right next to Bengal, a massive economic might, and you know China outside of you. You want to be really careful giving Burma 10% domestic trade power. They might make too much money here, you know. Anyway, you move on to a Land Leader Shock Pip, which is neat, combined with 10% looting speed, which is probably the most whatever modifier I can imagine. You pick up some Legitimacy, Devotion, Horde Unity, or whatever else you want to partake in. Nothing to complain about there. As well as 25% National Manpower modifier, probably the strongest individual modifier inside this entire idea set, but again, nothing to call home about. This is kind of disappointing, to be honest, which is probably why, yet again, you don't see this nation played. This entire exact same map color can be obtained as the Papal States or a bunch of other white nations like Austria, which are a lot more interesting to partake in than Sham, but that is going to be our fourth most obscure. But finally, we move on to a real doozy, because for our final position, we have a nation that to form requires quite a lot of land to be taken over. And if you take a look here and look at the required land, that's quite a lot of things you need to own for it. You also need to be Muslim, however, you need to obtain a primary culture of Fulani. Now, Fulani, at the start of the game, these provinces are uncolonized and is actually an event spawn nation that spawns here. So if you want to play an Iron Man game, the only way to become this nation is to actually culture switch to them, which I did by using the console command to spawn in monarch points and dev this province to the absolute moon, which let me become this primary culture as a release civilization of Kaboom. However, even if you are doing that, you're probably going to start as something like Fetishist, which again, you need to be Muslim and Fulani for the formable. Once you've got through those two very obscure hoops, you're able to go ahead and form Messina. Now, what does Messina give you? Well, apart from 25 prestige as well, Messina gives you arguably one of the nicer flags I've seen. You get a bunch of trees on a yellow background, unlike this flag, that's good. And you pick up quite a nice map color. It's a bit of like a paler purple. I don't know, I'm quite a fan, to be honest. It's quite a neat map color, but beyond the map color choices, you do not obtain new missions, which is quite sad. You get the default West African missions, and you don't even get new ideas. Like, it doesn't even knock you out of West African ideas. Like, there isn't a specific idea group to critique here. This is the regional ideas. This has basically zero flavor. There is no unique government, so you can flip into Ictar if you want, because you do have to be a Muslim for this, but that's it. There is practically no real reason to form this unless you want to see the weird yellow background with green trees, which is, hey, it's a reason, but it's not the best reason. To be clear as well, to actually form this nation, you need to go down as far as here for your land to be taken. Like, you need to take over a massive amount of land for this formable, and while it doesn't require anything like Admin Tech 10, if you're playing in the area, just play anyone else like Mali or Songhai or even Sokoto and have a much better experience. And for that reason, because there is literally no reason to form this nation, outside of the map color, even that's optional, I'm going to have to be placing this one in the #1 spot. But with that all said, that is going to be all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Soda, W Haste, Solemon, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nan Hatan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grandmill Flavia, Connor, Andrea Salberg, Decky, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napa, Glorious Leader, Zerkis, and Mr. Coomshock.